Hi, welcome to First Chapter Friday. My name is Lucy, and the book that I am going to be reading the first chapter of today is called Santiago's Road Home by Alexandra Diaz. And this is the story of Santiago, who lives in Mexico with his grandmother. At the beginning of the book, he has a chance to escape his grandmother's house. She is pretty abusive to him, and his future is uncertain when he leaves. He knows he has these coins in his hand, but he doesn't know where he's headed beyond that. He meets up with a kind young woman, Maria Dolores, who also has a daughter of her own, Alegria, and they take Santiago with them. Alegria's young, and Santiago's very good with little children, and she becomes very attached to them, and they sort of feel like family really quickly. Maria Dolores and Alegria are headed to the United States, or El Otro Lado as they call it, and they invite him to come with them. So they head to the United States to cross the border with very little. They have the clothes that they're wearing, they have backpacks, they have some water, and they end up struggling physically to make this journey, and they suffer from the elements and they become separated. And Santiago ends up in a detention center that's just for boys, young boys. So he's not with Alegria, he's not with Maria Dolores. He doesn't know where they are or how they're doing or if they even survived the arduous parts of the journey. So that much of the story takes place in the detention center in the United States. And it centers on Santiago and the other boys that he meets there and how he is going to get out of this detention center, and will he ever see Maria Dolores again, and does he even have family, and what is his future? This book really closely examines the situation in detention centers in the United States, and we get a glimpse into how the system works and the deprivations that these children suffer and the poor conditions. They're separated from their families, they're threatened with deportation to places that were unsafe for them, and they are really living in an environment and a situation that is not livable. So this book is very forthright in that way, and there are parts of it that are hard to read because of that. Santiago has, for the most part, a drive and a spirit that keeps him wanting to pursue his reconnection with his found family. There are times when the system feels like it's too much for him. I think this is an important book to read to get an introduction to the way that this system might work for these children who are trying to come into this country. So I am going to read the prologue and some of the first chapter of Santiago's Road Home. Prologue. Somewhere, neither here nor there. The bed creaks under Santiago's shivering body. Maybe it's not a bed, but a coffin. Had he thought about it, he would have preferred to go a different way, saving lost, invisible unicorns or escaping this prison to be free. But he never thought of death that way before, especially not of dying here like this, lost and alone. At least now he doesn't have to fight, doesn't have to try so hard. People who die are at peace. He could use some peace. He hears voices, but it's unclear if they're real or remembered. What is real anyway? He can't hold on anymore. As sure as the blinding light, death sways closer. Santiago knows it has come for him. He takes a deep breath, embracing the white light. Soon it will all be over, and I'm not afraid. They say a person's life flashes by before dying, but it's not his whole life. Just the events that led to this, the important ones, and the ones Santiago would rather forget. Chapter 1. Santiago watched Tio Isidro walk by him and the three toddlers as if they were nothing more than rocks in the yard. Not that the toddlers even looked up from their mud pies at the arrival of their papa. Just as well, or they would have seen an expression like a lightning storm ready to strike on their papa's face. He jumped to his feet as the front door slammed behind Tio, ready to urge the kids to safety before the storm broke. Except he wasn't quick enough. What do you mean you got fired? Tio Roberto's voice came clearly through the closed door. Have I told you the story of the singing Zanate? Santiago whispered excitedly as he pointed to a fence post. He whistled at the bird perched on top of the rotting wood, ready to make up a story on the spot. The children, Jesus, Apollo, and Artemisa, who normally loved hearing Santiago's stories, were too interested in their mud projects to pay attention to anything else, including the shouts from the house. But the mud wasn't enough to keep Santiago from hearing everything. "I mean, you insulted the boss's wife, and now I'm fired," Tio Isidro shouted back. "When have I met your boss's wife?" The viejita from next door opened her window a bit wider. Since she did not have a TV, her main source of entertainment was eavesdropping on everyone up and down the calle. Santiago would have given anything to be entertained by a TV instead. "Apparently you met her this morning, while she stood in front of you, waiting for the bus." "Patas flacas?" Tia retorted. "That was her?" "Patas flacas!" Artemisa screeched, as if calling someone skinny legs was the funniest insult in the world. For a 2.5-year-old, it probably was. "You called her that? To her face?" Tio exclaimed. "She cut in front of me." Tio Isidro let out a string of bad words, which Santiago covered up by splashing his hands in the mud and getting the kids to follow suit. Still, Tio's next yell remained completely audible. "How could you say that to her?" A crash like a pot being thrown to the floor erupted from the kitchen. This time, Jesus and Artemisa looked up from the mud. "Great, that was our dinner." Tio Roberto's accusations came out so loud and clear, the viejita next door must have been grinning at the great reception. "Unless you want to pick up the rice from the floor, we have nothing else to eat tonight, and we're all going to starve." "How can there be nothing to eat? I gave you money for groceries 2 days ago." "Yeah, and it's gone. You barely gave me enough for one meal." "Fine. You go look for a job and see how much you earn after working 12 or 15 hours a day." The door banged open and slammed shut after Tio Isidro. If Santiago and the toddlers were invisible before, they were non-existent this time. Tio stepped on a stray shoe one of the kids had taken off and didn't notice it under his foot before he crossed the street in the direction of the local bar. Santiago waited for Tia to run after her husband, but the door stayed shut. A stray curl fell over Apollo's eye. Santiago brushed it away, careful not to get mud from his own hands onto the boy's face. "Too bad these mud pies won't taste as good as they look," he said softly to his charges. "Maybe we'll just need to gobble you guys up instead." He smeared mud on Jesus's bare belly and got a giggle in reply. Apollo and Artemisa wiggled their hands at Santiago and did the butt bounce dance. He tickled all 3 of them until they were pushing themselves up on wobbly feet to run away with shrieks of laughter, only to slip and land back in the mud. "Why are my children playing in the mud like some puerfuanos?" Tio Roberto stood in front of them with her hands on her hips and a scowl across her red face. Santiago ignored the orphan comment, like he did most of the insults his tia sent his way. Sure, the kids were dirty, covered from head to diaper in mud, but they were happy, entertained, and safe. A rarity in this house. "It's so hot I thought they might enjoy it. Don't worry, I'll clean them up." He picked up Artemisa and headed to the outdoor water pump, but Tia blocked his path. "You don't have time. The last bus is leaving soon." She reached into her apron pocket and handed him some peso coins, just enough for the bus fare. "We can't afford to keep you anymore. Give your grandmother our regrets." Regrets didn't even begin to explain it. Santiago let the toddler slide down his body, leaving a trail of mud on his own bare chest and pant legs. His hand absently rubbed the burn marks still visible on his arm as he remembered the pain of the cigarettes from his last day with his grandmother. "And what about the babies? Who'll take care of them?" Santiago spoke without thinking. A shadow darkened Tia's eyes. He jerked his head back, and in that split second, her hand missed contact with his cheek. Missing her target only raised Tia's anger. "I'm their mother. You think I can't raise my own hijos? I got along de los más bien before you got here." This time Santiago kept his mouth shut. They obviously had a different understanding of just fine. He remembered the last family wedding, during which the 3 kids had yelled continuously, being dragged out of the church kicking and screaming, and broken free to shove 6 greedy hands directly into the wedding cake, all while Tia had cried, swearing to Dios that she couldn't take it anymore. Yes, she got along de lo más bien. It was she, biologically his grandmother, but better known in his mind as La Malvada, the evil one, who thought up the golden solution: send Santiago to his aunt and uncle's house to take care of the toddlers. Tia, though technically a second cousin and not Santiago's aunt, had jumped at the idea of having a free babysitter, and La Malvada marveled at getting rid of the grandson she despised. Santiago hadn't complained. Honestly, this suited him just fine. Sure, Tia blamed him for everything, the kids getting chickenpox, lice, diaper rash, runny noses, still not talking in full sentences, waking up in the middle of the night, not eating too much, but at the end of the day, it didn't compare to the abuse of living with La Malvada. Please let me stay. Santiago held out his hand to return the bus fare, but his Tio ignored it. I'll take care of everything tonight. You relax. I'll bathe the kids, feed them. There's nothing to eat, idiota, she reminded him. What if I get a job? What job are you going to get when your uncle has no work? No answer came to Santiago. No one had work to offer. No one had spare money to pay someone for work. Tia folded her arms across her chest and nodded to the calle. Largate. Unless you want to walk the 2 hours all the way to your grandmother's house, you better go. Santiago stared at the house that had been his home for the past 7 months. In the room he shared with the 3 kids were clothes too small for him. His one possession, a small pocket knife, had been found in the road. The blade was dull, the scissors didn't open, and the toothpick and tweezers were missing, but it was his. Like all good pocket knives, it remained with him at all times. He washed the mud off his hands and chest at the outdoor pump and pulled on the t-shirt he'd taken off before playing in the mud. Apollo stood up and lifted his arms, expecting to be carried. But Tia stepped in front of her children, blocking them from their babysitter. Artemisa scooped up a particularly gooey handful of mud and flung it at her mother's shoe. Tia didn't notice. Her attention remained on Santiago. Santiago looked into the faces of each of the kids, faces that had worked their way into his heart. He raised his hand in goodbye. Listen to your mama, chiquitines. No longer able to look at them, he turned down the same road his Tio had traversed moments before. In perfect synchronicity, the 3 kids broke into cries. And that's where I'm going to stop. There's more of chapter 1. But you get to learn that Santiago is having to return to a grandmother that really didn't treat him well. The situation with his aunt and uncles was, though not wonderful, somewhat of a reprieve from that. So he doesn't have a lot of choices about where he can go. And he has these coins in his hand, and so he's going to try to go somewhere else. And that is where this really tough journey begins. As I said earlier, there are parts of this book that are not very easy to read, but it's a very well-written book, and Santiago is a really strong character. And it's interesting and important to see the choices that he really doesn't have, the lack of choices that drive him to do what he has to do. And ultimately, it is a book about finding your own family and finding your way. I really recommend Santiago's Road Home by Alexandra Diaz. Thanks for joining me.